This has gone too far as reports and rumors are really starting to pick up surrounding one player and the Toronto Maple Leafs as Chris Johnson has come out with a very wild report that has caused a spark in Leafs land surrounding this trade. We'll break down exactly what that is and discuss what this means going forward, as well as a few other things on this episode, folks. But before we get to it all, if you're part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. About 71% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel. You guys have been absolute beasts with the support. Thank you guys for that, Darius. A lot to go over today, and obviously the Leafs are involved in a lot of different trade conversations according to reports and rumors, but there's one that the conversations have gone and the rumors have started to take over a little bit, and I think they've gone too far surrounding one player in particular because I don't think fans want this necessarily to happen, and it is surrounding Erik Karlsson. As a new report has dropped from Chris Johnson revealing surrounding the Erik Karlsson, speculation and things like that, because there's been a lot of talks and we've covered it in videos in the past about him getting traded to the Leafs, all these different things. We went and said they're not going to retain half of that salary for anybody. And, if a trade is possible, but of course, in order for that to happen, there would have to be some, interesting salary works here. So there's obviously, again, we've covered it in the channel a couple times, in passing. The Leafs have had interest in the past with Erik Karlsson. There's rumblings about a Karlsson for Morgan Riley swap, but things have gotten a little bit interesting here now over the past week or so, especially given the fact that the Leafs are trying to make another trade, though I don't know if this is necessarily the one that would put them over the edge.
No, I don't think this is the one that puts them over the edge, but it's an interesting one. We're going to talk it out because I think that it could actually make some sense. I don't know if it makes too much sense for the Pittsburgh Penguins, but for the Leafs, I think it could actually make some sense. Now, we know from obviously Chris Johnson on Erik Karlsson that they're not just going to give him away for free, first of all, and they're not going to retain half, but they will retain some salary, which I think makes things very interesting for any team that's inquiring about him and wanting to acquire him. Now, we've mentioned in the past in other videos that, Erik Karlsson, the Leafs have kicked tires on him. You just mentioned that as well. Carolina, a couple other teams, Florida, somehow kicking tires on Erik Karlsson. But if the Leafs were to acquire this player, if they're not retaining half, you got to make the salary work. You have to move some salary out. Now, if you look at Erik Karlsson's contract, he makes $11.5 million, but there's some retained salary from the San Jose Sharks. So he actually only makes $10 million against the books, as you can see here, 11.5, but he's actually only making $10 million if you were to acquire him straight up without any retained salary. So I could see the Pittsburgh Penguins retaining up to $3 million because they have the cap space to do that, and they can eat as much salary as they want because their lineup's almost solidified heading into next season. So they can eat that money. If you bring him down to a $7 million cap hit, if you were to send Morgan Riley the other way, now listen, you have to talk to Morgan Riley, have him waive his no movement clause, all of these things. So there is a bit of, a wall in the way per se. But if you were to talk to Morgan Riley and he were to waive, you have Erik Karlsson down at 7 million. You're essentially swapping out cap hits. You're actually saving $500,000. And I think that it could make some sense. The Leafs have, a bunch of right shot defensemen now, which is awesome. Erik Karlsson is that power play quarterback for you. Like, he's not the 100-point player he was 2 years ago or 3 years ago at this point in San Jose, but he's still putting up almost 60 points a year with the Pittsburgh Penguins and doing a lot of that on the power play. So he would be your power play quarterback, your offensive defenseman, because I feel like the Leafs in the last couple of years have gone not backwards, but they've gotten so many guys that play a tough style that, can move the puck. And I think that's underrated as well, but not necessarily that pure offensive defenseman, right? So I feel like they're all of a sudden lacking that. So I feel like this could make some sense, but I feel like there is too much logistics in the way, if you will, to get it done. But it's an interesting idea. And I think for the Pittsburgh Penguins, why would they take Morgan Riley back? Well, he's younger. I feel like he still has some more upside, of course. And you're getting some value back for a player in Erik Karlsson. And it's not just a one-for-one swap, in my eyes. Kyle Dubas is probably calling about some of the prospects the Leafs have as well.
Yeah, Morgan Riley, 31 years old. Of course, Erik Karlsson, 35. I mean, who would you prefer? That's obviously the question mark. We're talking a lot about the DNA change and things like that. And again, there's been a number of reports for the Leafs specifically because of the DNA change. And would this affect their, would this be a top six forward that they're getting in return? No, it's obviously a defenseman, but you could argue that Karlsson would help give them some, more veteran leadership maybe and provide some more offense because Morgan Riley has had a couple down years here. But regarding what you mentioned there's a lot of players on both the Leafs and the Penguins that could make a trade interesting. And you obviously look at the Penguins' top four lines. You look at some of the prospects, both Cade Weber and the defense prospect and real players in Bobby McMann who played last year. Cade Weber would be an interesting name. Now, I'm curious to see what you guys think. Let us know in the comment section. Would you do a Morgan Riley and Cade Weber type deal for, Erik Karlsson? Cade Weber, he is 24. Like, he's approaching the point where he would want to play in the, NHL here. But Darius, there is some, and you would assume that the Leafs would have to give up some other assets in a trade, and that Kyle Dubas would ask for a prospect, not a high-end one, like no Ben Danford, Easton Cowan, or anyone like that. However, somebody in a deal back. And of course, Cade Weber is an interesting one. Hits RFA in 2027, a 27-year-old defenseman. So essentially what you'd be doing is swapping Riley for Karlsson. You'd have to assume and hope that Karlsson is just a better player than Riley is next year, which I think would be probably a safe assumption despite the age. And then of course you're giving up also a prospect in order to get this going.
Yeah, and I think that this could make some sense for the Penguins in terms of Cade Weber. He's gonna get playing time with the Marlies, but I feel like with the Pittsburgh Penguins, maybe he's touching the NHL at points this year, right? So that could interest first of all him and maybe the Penguins. And he's a big body; they need more of those over in Pittsburgh as well, because we know the way that Kyle Dubas likes to build his teams. But when you look at a guy like Bobby McMann as well, like I said, do not get married to this player being on this roster because he's heading into the second year of his contract extension. It's a pretty good value contract for what he brings, but he wasn't very consistent, didn't show anything in the playoffs at all. So don't get married to that player on the roster. That could be interesting for the Penguins too, to kind of add more to their roster and remain somewhat competitive, because I think that is important to Sidney Crosby. So that is interesting. But I think that Dubas is probably calling on guys like Danford and Cowan. I don't think you can give them up in this trade. You're still giving Pittsburgh some pretty good value, and they're getting younger in this way. The only thing I think for the Toronto Maple Leafs with this is you're getting a lot older. You are getting that offensive output, your power play quarterback, all of those things, probably for the next 2 or 3 years, which is what the window is anyway. But I do worry about that a little bit. But to get back to what's going to Pittsburgh, maybe it's McMahon, maybe a prospect like Weber. The Leafs don't have too much in the prospect pool to give up at this point, so it could be an interesting idea. I do think that Dubas really likes Dennis Hildeby, and if that gets it done as well, I would do that trade. I would absolutely give up Dennis Hildeby because I think he's going to be a great goalie and in the NHL, but I think that Akhtiamov is the guy right now. So if that gets it done, then yeah, you do it. But I feel like Dubas is going to be asking for a little bit more in terms of value, but this would certainly make the salary cap work.
Yeah, and obviously, I think there's a lot of options for trades with the Pittsburgh Penguins. You mentioned Dan Silby. They have Tristan Jarry there as their goalie right now, as Silovs as the backup. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that, whether they want to, again, Hildeby, would he factor in or would he take over Silovs' spot? That's a big question mark. And then look at the projected cap space, $2.9 million. But again, important thing to note here, like you mentioned, Karlsson only makes $10 million from the cap. And the new report from Chris Johnson, rather. It's going to be interesting, and ultimately the Leafs need to make some moves here. Maybe if they don't end up finding a good fit for the top six winger, they think, okay, let's at least just upgrade somewhere, and we have an available trade there. That's going to be the biggest question for a team in the Pittsburgh Penguins, who have a lot of projected cap space. They can move things around. But at the end of the day, things have gone, I think too far here with the conversations of Erik Karlsson. But let us know down below what your thoughts are on this. Would you want to see a deal happen? And if so, who do you want to see the Leafs give up? Thank you guys for watching. See you later.